When a Charakarka is suffering from the Mrityupada, we use Namah Shivaya. When an Arudapada is suffering from the Mrityupada, we do worship of Varuna. And the only real worship, there's two places where you find Varuna worship. One is there's Rig Vedic hymns worshipping Varuna, and you can find one of them. Guruji has some in his Crux of Vedic Astrology, and use that. And then in Varuna's lord of one of the nakshatras. So in a lot of nakshatra books, you'll see certain mantras for Varuna. So because Varuna is... he's, besides being, like we were talking about this morning, being a very wise teacher, he's also, when you mess up, he's the one who, he has the noose in his hand, and he throws the noose around your neck and pulls you off to make you suffer. So by worshiping Varuna in the traditional Vedic way, it calms that down. And so you're not going to really do that unless there's a major problem. You have A4 and A8 conjunct and your mother's suffering terribly and you want to do something to help her, and she won't do anything herself. You just go off and do some Varuna mantras or a Varuna puja and you're helping your mother. Yeah. And but you don't worship the nakshatra, you worship the deity. Yeah. Okay, and then I mentioned earlier for seeing accidents, make sure you see it in Vimshotri and Narayan. They have to agree. They both have to show it. If one's showing it, it doesn't happen. Try it, look, and share your research with me. This is what I found. When Vimshotri Dasha of the A8 will show Mrityupada results of planets conjunct the A8, and in the Vimshotri Dasha of planets conjunct the A8 or anything associated with the Vimshotri of the 8, it shows a little bit of suffering in the mind, mental suffering. Not always physical suffering, but definitely some mental suffering. And when the problem in general with Mrityupada is coming, it's not being caused by one of the above examples, we use Mrityunjaya mantra. Mrityunjaya mantra, in some regards, can be used in all these cases. But those other two cases were just a little bit more specific remedies. That'll be a little bit faster. But in general, Mrityupada problems, Mrityunjaya mantra is Mrit. If we look at the name, Mrityupada. Mrit means death. It means dead. Mrit. And so Mrityupada, it's the image, it's the pada, the calculation, the aruda of death. The 8th house. And Mrityunjaya, Jaya means victory. So it's the victory over Mrityu. So it's the victory over death. So the Mrityunjaya mantra is getting victory over the Mrityupada. So it's making us get victory over the suffering and everything that we've talked about. Okay, so we got just, how am I doing time-wise? 10 more minutes. So I'm going to go over transits. I think this is the last part. Yeah, we're almost done. So in the Kala Chakra, Mars is opposite Saturn. And so what this shows is that Mars has the power to overcome Saturn. So because the Mrityupada is karakad by Saturn and everything it's representing is very Saturnian, the suffering, it's the transit of Mars over the Mrityupada, or 7th from, is going to show a period where you can overcome that suffering. They say that it's a good time to go to battle, a good time to start a fight, because, whatever is causing you suffering, if your neighbors are charging too much on something and you want to just, country-wise, and you wanted to take over so that the oil prices would go down, when the Mars is going over the Mrityupada, that'd be the best time. Because then it would get rid of your suffering instead of creating more suffering. So if you go to war at the wrong time, it actually causes problems for yourself. If you go to war at the right time, then it alleviates your problems. It's all about timing. So when it comes to...
Excuse me, what if Mars, what if A8 is is with Mars in a Rashi?
That we already talked about. That all the other stuff is about planets conjunct, if it's Charakarka. If the more planets conjuncted, the more suffering. We talked about the spiritual experiences, and we talked about Charakarkas and Arudas. Now we're talking about transits. I think I got just everything covered in here. So, right? I tried to cover, leave no stone unturned. So if you go back and look, I basically tried to nail everything down. Now the transit of Mars over the Mrityupada, because Mars has that power to get rid of Saturn, that's the best time to really work on removing these points of suffering in our life. If the Mrityupada is causing some suffering, if some debt, some whatever it's representing, this is the best time to really maybe try and do a mantra to get over it, to try and make a change in our life to get over this suffering. Whatever the problem is that the Mrityupada is causing, as we talked about this whole class, that you just learned how to calculate the problem, okay, and everything else. Now, it's the Mars transit that's the best time to try. So we just learned the mantras to get over it. So, but are you just going to do the mantra for how long, when, who, If you do the mantras at the right time, you're going to get 10 times more effect. So if you practice those Mrityunjaya mantras or the Varuna mantras or the Shiva Panchakshari mantra, when Mars is going over, transiting the Mrityupada, you'll get 10 times, 100 times better results. Okay.
And would that also go for if you're doing it for spiritual development, not because you have affliction? Would it work? Would that be a good time for spiritual development with Mars?
Not as much. It's more when the sun is transiting the trines or the Mrityupada itself.
Would be the best time.
That's the spiritual. That's the best time to try and get the spiritual experiences. It's the sun that's going to activate that. The Mars is trying to destroy the negativity of the Saturn aspect. The sun is going to activate the real spiritual experience. So, yeah, good question. So Saturn transiting the Mrityupada, or seventh from it. So it's already, it's almost like, what I've seen is, it's pretty much like a Saturn return. Except instead of, what a Saturn return does is it really kind of gets you to focus on how you've been using your time in life and mature in that way. The Saturn transit of the Mrityupada really gets you to look at what's causing you suffering and pain. Like, what are your problems? And it really forces you to look at it and to deal with it. You don't have a problem because it becomes, the suffering of the Mrityupada becomes so much stronger at that time. You're forced to look at it and deal with it. And sometimes you can overcome it, sometimes you can't. It's, depending on the situation. But that transit of Saturn is going to really make that a much worse situation. Now, Rahu and Ketu transiting the Mrityupada. I've found it was just a strange guess. I had one or two charts of people that had these bad Kundalini experiences. And if it was like the case, they all had Rahu or Ketu transiting the Mrityupada at the time of these negative spiritual experiences or Kundalini issues. But at the same time, it can cause good spiritual experience as well. Like Ramana Maharshi at the time of his realization Rahu was transiting his Mrityupada. So there's benefic experience as well from Rahu and Ketu, depending on how everything in the chart is lined up. But there's guaranteed to be some Kundalini shaking up a little bit. How well that's handled is also going to be connected to the 10th house from the Mrityupada. There's a lot, hallucinations, hearing voices. Also, the relationship to intoxicants in a person's life is really going to come up at the time where Rahu and Ketu are transiting the Mrityupada. There can be various intoxication experiences, realizations in that or negative experiences, depending on the situations that we mentioned earlier. Sun transit brings death and spiritual transformations. So that's, as we were saying, the best time for spiritual practices. Now the moon transit of the AA is not good. It's the moon is Marna Karkasthana in the 8th house. So the Mrityupada, the moon feels very self-conscious, it's very weak, transiting the Mrityupada. Now it does it quite often, once a month. So the big thing is we have to look at the dasha. If the dasha is bad, then the moon transiting the Mrityupada is going to have an effect. If we're running a good dasha, it's not a big deal. If you're doing a big endeavor, buying a new house, buying a big car, things of that nature, do factor in the Mrityu-pada. Make sure that the moon's not transiting the Mrityu-pada or the 8th house. That was a big thing that Guruji almost yelled at me pretty recently. I was going to have my house blessings, the Vastu Shanti, done while my moon was in the 8th house. And